Hello, everyone. I'll be sharing with you this time the upcoming adult Sunday school lesson for April the 9th, Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. The lesson title is about the resurrection. It's called Disciples Believe the Resurrection, coming from Luke chapter 24. Your lesson gives a number of verses beginning at verse 13. I would encourage you to read all the verses from 13 to 32. As I said, this is on the resurrection. This is the second in 4 Bible lessons on this particular topic. The narrative that we have, which is basically about 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, is one that I preached on a number of occasions. It is an endearing story. It is also filled with an element of mystery. Some weeks ago, I would pass by, while driving, a church that had this message on its marquee sign, and I quote, "God doesn't need us, but we desperately need him." Now, I certainly would fully agree with the second part, that we desperately need God, but the first part, I don't really agree with. While I understand that my being doesn't make God's being more or less real, I must believe that God needs the ones he has created. God created us and has also been willing to die for us. For God to be the God of love, agape love, he must need us and want us. You see, God is all about relationship. And that need for relationship fits into what happened on the road to Emmaus. Do you recognize Jesus? One of the themes of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances is that he was not always easily recognizable. When Mary Magdalene confronted the risen Lord, she assumed that the man before her was the gardener, the caretaker of the garden tomb. She did not recognize Jesus until Jesus spoke her name. For these 2 disciples, it was similar. They saw a man and they did not recognize him. Certainly, they had heard Jesus speak many times. They had watched him many times. They had been with him many times. They were 2 of Jesus's disciples. We know they had been with the original disciples because they knew of the women's report. They knew of Peter and John's report that the tomb was empty. Jesus was not there. Had his body been stolen, or had Jesus been resurrected? Apparently, it was easier for them to believe the worst. Maybe sometimes we believe the worst. For my interpretation of this lesson, I want to focus on 3 dispositions of these 2 disciples: despair, teachability, and recognition of truth. Despair. Verse 17 tells us that their faces were downcast. They were sad. Maybe they even felt defeated. One of the things that I do as a pastor is provide counseling to church members and friends. Sometimes I provide counsel to pastor friends. In fact, this morning I provided counsel to a fellow pastor and also to a church friend. In both instances, my friends needed encouragement. Don't we all sometimes need encouragement? We need a friend. We need to be lifted up. We also are sometimes downcast. The problem with despair is that it causes us to lose perspective on truth. We are not our best selves when we are living in despair. As I assess these 2 men, these 2 traveling men to Emmaus, these 2 disciples, I believe they were at that moment confused. They were not thinking and seeing things clearly. As they were traveling, it was important that they were talking to each other. Talking and discussing can be therapeutic. It can help give us a better perspective. It can, but it doesn't always. When we are talking and discussing, one of us needs to be the positive person. Apparently, neither of these men were truly helping bring hope and encouragement to each other. While it is not clearly stated, my belief is that they were living in fear. In fear. Fear that Jesus' body had been stolen and they would never learn the truth. They would never see him again. Some years ago, I had a cousin who had been missing for several years. No one knew where, no one knew why. Her husband intimated that she had just left, just disappeared from his life. While that sometimes happens when people move away and create a new hidden life, it just didn't seem likely that my cousin had done that. In the end, we discovered the horrible truth that my cousin had been murdered by her husband. He tried to hide her body. Eventually, he was found guilty and is in prison to this day. The point I want to make is that sometimes that which is most difficult and despairing is not knowing. It is often easier to deal with a bad truth than not knowing the truth. Not knowing the truth can leave us stuck in life. Not a good thing. Secondly, there's teachability. Sometimes in life, it's not about where you begin, but it's about the journey, about the life journey. This journey with Jesus changed their lives as Jesus began to teach them, certainly interpreting correctly the prophets, the prophetic scriptures about Messiah. They listened and they learned. They were encouraged. We all need to be teachable. One of my personal goals in life is to learn something new every day. In the morning, I get a dictionary word for today. In the morning, I also read scripture for today. I keep up with world events. I try to look at all of life through a biblical lens. Because these two men were teachable, they were able to find clarity of vision and see the resurrected Jesus Christ. And then thirdly, there is recognition of truth. When you read or study your lesson, it will end on verse 31 in your book. It should have, in my opinion, included verse 32. So let me read verses 30 to 32 with you. It was as he reclined at the table with them that he took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight. And they said to one another, "Weren't our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the road and explaining the scriptures to us?" Now think about what had happened in those few minutes. Jesus looks them in the eyes. He gives them the Eucharist bread. They see in the act of bread breaking Jesus. They see him with fresh eyes. Revelation happens. And when Jesus disappears, vanishes, they have an epiphany of truth. They said, and I quote, "Weren't our hearts burning within us?" They had an emotional, spiritual experience. For us, we might call this salvation. And also for them, it was salvation in some sense, because salvation is never complete unless we believe the resurrection as both historical and spiritual fact. This revelation of the fullness of Jesus Christ changed their lives, such that they were compelled to go back to Jerusalem to tell the others, and that is our Easter message, quote, "He is risen. He is risen indeed." God bless. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you on Easter Sunday.